listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing author Jennifer Elizabeth Moore. Jennifer is the author of the book Empathic Mastery, and if you're an empath, you'll love this interview. I'm here with Jennifer Elizabeth Moore, who is the author of the book Empathic Mastery. Did I pronounce the name of your book correctly?
You did. Some people call it Empathetic Mastery, but it is Empathic Mastery, so you got it.
Jennifer, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm really excited to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. So, as you've already said, my name is Jennifer Moore, and I am the author of the book Empathic Mastery, which at this point has won 3 awards. So it is not only an Amazon bestseller, it is also a 3-time award-winning book. And I am also the master trainer, or a master trainer, for EFT International. And if you're wondering what EFT stands for, that's Emotional Freedom Techniques. And I'm a mentor and a healer for highly sensitive empathic women. So that's sort of the short version of all the things that I do. Thank you so much for having me.
The foreword of your book was written by Chris Ferraro. Who is Chris, and other than writing the foreword to your book, what is Chris best known for?
Oh my God. So Chris is like a goddess. Chris is an absolutely amazing human being who is working on her 3rd book right now. Her first book is called Energy Healing, and her second book is called Manifesting. And both of these books were released by St. Martin's Press. And Chris, I just happened to be lucky enough to be one of her friends. She is a remarkable energy healer. She is an incredible writer, incredible lecturer, and just really all-around wonderful, wonderful human being.
Now, I understand there are some multi-author books that you've been a contributing author to. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The timing of this particular conversation couldn't be more perfect because I just finished writing a chapter for the 4th multi-author book that I'm part of. And so I am part of the Wellness Universe's guides. One of them is 25 tools for stress relief. And the other one is the Wellness Universe Guide to, good Lord, I'm butchering the name of this. Hold on for 1 second.
Okay.
I'll be right back. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay, so let me tell you what they're called correctly. So the first one is the Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, 25 Tools for Stress Relief. And then the second one is the Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, 25 Tools for Goddesses. And these 2 books were spearheaded by a dear friend of mine, Anna Pereira, who is the head of the Wellness Universe, the founder and the head of Wellness Universe. And then I also have a chapter in another book that is spearheaded by an amazing podcaster, Katie Carey, who has Soulful Valley Podcasting. And that is Evolving on Purpose, Co-Creating with the Divine. And then, as I mentioned, I just completed a chapter for a new book called The Energy Healer's Oracle, which, depending on when this show is airing, may or may not be out, because both Katie's book and then The Energy Healer's Oracle book, which is spearheaded by this remarkable woman, Angela. And I have to pull up Angela's name on paper so that I can say it right, because otherwise I'm going to mutilate it. Because Angela is Angela Aurora Medway Smith. So That is Angela. So I've been part of a number of multi-author books. And if you're not familiar with the concept of multi-author books, they are basically, they're anthologies, but often done by people who are writing about self-help techniques. I mean, I'm sure there's a million different kinds of multi-author books, but it has really been a delight to be part of these because I've had the opportunity to collaborate with some really amazing authors and connect with other people who are really like-minded, as well as participate in the excitement of a launch that has like 25 different people involved in it and who are all really excited about getting a book into the world.
I'll just let you know this is an interview, not a game show. So if you have to look something up in like a file or on a computer during this interview, that's okay.
Oh, fantastic. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. Now, I always, as somebody who is also a podcaster, I really appreciate trying to do things as few takes as possible. So, because I know how tedious editing can be.
Is Empathic Mastery self-published or traditionally published?
It is self-published. And I could talk a lot about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, when I first started looking at the idea of doing publishing a book, I started looking into the choices between publishing, publishing traditionally and self-publishing. And one of the things that I kept on running into was basically the information that at this point in time, if you want to get a book out into the world via traditional publishing methods, they want to see that you have a substantial platform. They want to see that you've got a very large mailing list. They want to see that you have a really large social media following. And basically that's when they'll consider playing ball with you in most cases. Now, in the case of my friend Chris, her book was just miraculously landed in her lap. Like it was one of those things where she was like, I don't know how I did this, but this just happened to happen. And I mean, she also has a tendency to not necessarily toot her own horn. And so there are some reasons why Chris's name came up. But when I made the decision to go with self-publishing, I decided to do that because when it comes to, I wasn't even sure if I would be able to find a major publisher that would be willing to take on my book as somebody with a moderate, a moderate sized platform. Definitely not tiny, but at the same time, not huge the way that it seems like authors are expected to do this. But the other part of it was that from what I could see, authors are expected to promote their books. They are expected to generate most of the buzz and really have to do as much work as a self-publishing author does in terms of getting the word out about their book. And but they get where an author who is self-publishing can get up to upwards of 70% of a royalty on the books, in some platforms, in some cases even more. Basically, you're talking possibly 70 cents or less per book sold if somebody's lucky, if they're going through a traditional publishing route. And the thing is that for the amount of effort that one is going to be putting into marketing, my basic attitude was I'd rather be able to generate or reap the rewards of that, as well as knowing that I was going to be putting the same amount of effort in. I figured actually self-publishing is a really good way to build up one's platform, and then eventually, if it seems like a good idea, going with the traditional publishers once the platform is built up. So I could talk more and more or on and on about just kind of why as a Capricorn with Virgo rising, this seemed like the more practical and pragmatic idea. But that's kind of in a nutshell why I made that decision.
Yeah, and the reason I'm going the self-publishing route with the books I'm currently writing, for my first book I wrote way back in 2019, I wasn't in the best mental state writing that, and I kind of self-published that just out of desperation more than
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I am taking books I'm currently writing, which there's quite a few of, more seriously and doing more of a serious self-publishing effort. And the reason I've decided to do self-publishing is that even a traditionally published author has to do a ton of his or her own marketing.
Exactly. There's no, the thing about publishing companies these days is that they do the distribution for you, but they're not, and they do the, they're going to foot the bill for the editing. They're going to foot the bill for hopefully for the cover and things like that. But like nowadays, you still have to do all the marketing. And in many cases, I've known authors who were carried by major publishers who even had to like create their own book promo, like their own book or book trailer, the little YouTube videos and stuff for the book. So that I'm right there with you. That's another big reason why I was like indie publishing is the way to go, because it's not like the big publishing companies or big publishing houses are really helping you that much.
Whereas self-publishing, it's an expectation that you're going to have to market the book yourself.
Exactly.
And whereas there are some traditionally published authors that might make the mistake of thinking the publishing house is going to market everything for them when they have to do some marketing anyways.
Right. Exactly. And so, I think, and the thing is that once you've gone the route of self-publishing, then I think that one of the real advantages of going the route of self-publishing is that you do get if you're doing it right, you're going to get an opportunity to learn how to market. You're going to get an opportunity to build up some excitement and buzz about your book and really get it out there. And eventually, if that happens, then you've got a platform and the means for promoting a book if you eventually do go through a major publisher, because sort of the infrastructure is established. But starting with a major publisher with no infrastructure established, it can be really, really frustrating. And some of the things I've heard even is that, nowadays they will give you like a stipend or an advance on the book, but that is against the sales of the book. And so if as an inexperienced author you get picked up by a publisher, I think one of the big challenges with that is that, you may actually end up owing the publishing company money for the advance if you don't sell enough books. And that is definitely dependent on your ability to market it.
And also regarding your writing style, you've described yourself as a spoken word processor than a written word type writer. What do you mean by that, and how has that caused challenges for you?
Oh,
as an
good
author?
Lord, has that caused challenges? So I am a very verbal person. The way that I come to understand things is by asking questions, repeating answers, and talking about things. If you couldn't tell already, I'm a very, very verbal person. And what I have found is that information processes for me by speaking about it, by talking about it, by engaging with other people about it. Whereas writing is something that, depending on how much bandwidth I have and how sort of peppy my brain is on any given day, I may or may not be able to make heads or tails of what I'm looking at on a page. So I also come from a family with dyslexia, a fair amount of it. And so what is bizarre for me is that somewhere around the age of 9, I kind of clicked from not being able to read very well to suddenly being able to read. But it's like my capacity to make sense of words on paper is like an on-off switch. Sometimes it's really, really easy and I can read pages and pages and pages of text without it being a big deal. And then other times when I'm tired or I've got a lot on my mind, it's like being in a tape loop where I'm just going to see the words on the page. They'll be kind of jumbled, but also I might find myself just like reading the same sentence over and over again and not making, and it just doesn't even make sense. So because of this particular let's say, neurodiversity, my way of processing information being verbal, what I have found is that the best way for me to get any, like, more than about 3,000 words on paper is to have a conversation, to record an interview with somebody, to teach a class, to have to talk about what the material that I'm thinking about, that I'm working on, and then recording that, taking it and ripping it to with a transcription, so that I can now look at the words. And then once I have that sort of the ideas caught, it's sort of like some people talk about just that kind of like mind dump first draft as they're writing. I just speak the first draft. And so then what I do is once I've got it on paper, then I will start to comb through it. But what I've actually found to be really helpful is that I will often not be the first person to go through that really, really, really messy draft. I actually kick it over to my content editor, Nikki, who is also Nikki Starcat Shields, who is an amazing, she calls herself a book midwife, and Nikki really helps people to bring books out into the world, especially for people who are really reluctant or ambivalent about bringing their book out into the world. But so what I will do is I'll kick the book over to her and say, please take a machete to this. Please, find the themes that make sense and just like categorize stuff and help me to put it into order. So once Nikki has done that, then what I do is I take the book back and I sit my buttocksies down in a chair and I basically commit to periods of time where I comb through the material and I basically expand upon it, add stories to it, work with it, play with it, and do this. And then after that is done, and we're talking about a process that can take upwards of like days, weeks, or months to do this. After that process is done, then I bring it back over to another friend of mine who is an amazing editor who I've been working with now since night. She has been reading my writing and helping me with my writing since 1994, my friend Amy. And so Amy and I will then go through it together, read through it aloud together, work through it, and comb through the material, eliminating my tendency to have tons of so's, ands, and that's everywhere in the writing, as well as to remove what I call my Yoda speak, where I have a tendency to transpose words in a way that Yoda would, and which makes complete sense to me, but not necessarily to the average reader. So that is kind of the how do I, as somebody with a history, a heritage, legacy of learning disabilities, and I would call myself a bit neurospicy. How do I get the words on the paper? That is how I do it. And the thing that I'm struck by as I'm speaking this is that, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it also takes a book to raise or a village to raise a book. And that doing it is so much easier to do this work when you know that there are other people who've got your back, as well as other people who've another set of eyes or more to look at things and be like, ooh, what were you thinking there, honey? Like, what is that all about?
Yeah, I have more of what's considered a developmental disorder than a learning disability, autism spectrum disorder, and I actually learn better reading text but if I read too quickly, I don't retain information very well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I'm trying to. This is where I can. This happens to me. Sometimes I'll think up something I want to say and then completely forget it like 1 second before I was going to say it.
Aaron, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have had that. Sadly, I have had that experience more times than I can count.
Okay, I'll
so
move
you were
on to
talking about well, I was talking about being basically that I'm an auditory processor, and that but that you are more of a visual processor in the sense that you can look at something, and that works. But if you read it too quickly, you lose the plot.
Yeah, and also because I have an autism spectrum disorder, and my hands are usually not very stable and tend to fidget around uncontrollably. I often have trouble reading my own handwriting, and the only way I can write is via a computer.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, are you planning on writing more books in the future?
Yes, Aaron, I am. As a matter of fact, I have a book that is in Nikki's hands right now that I wrote it in a really unusual way. I went off to a writing retreat back in July, and I decided I was just going to try something really unusual, and I was just going to sort of like basically, for lack of a better term, channel the book. And I spent the course of the next 5 days just sort of speaking and recording and allowing the book to sort of come through me, being sort of inspired. But the thing is, unlike some people who might try to transmit, quote, channeled messages, unquote, into the world, I'm a strong believer in editing. So at this point, instead of just like throwing it all out there in the sort of the extremely convoluted way it came out, it is now in the process of being sorted through. And over the course of the next couple months, I'm going to be going back in and doing the get my butt in the chair, sit down and write it and work on it. And then my plan is actually for a launch for December of 2023.
Now, you host a podcast called the Empathic Mastery Show, and what type of content is typically featured in your podcast's episodes?
So the Empathic Mastery Show is primarily interviews, talking with other highly sensitive empathic people. And basically, it is a show where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and how this impacts all aspects of our lives. And then what I do is I speak to people about the unique ways that being an empath or being just very highly sensitive and empathic has impacted their life specifically. So for example, one of the interviews that I did earlier, like last summer, was with somebody who's in animal rescue and why so frequently empaths tend to end up in animal rescue, and also some of the challenges of being an empath in animal rescue. Another conversation that I had was with somebody who experienced a near-death experience when she was in the military, and it completely transformed her life. Another conversation I had was with somebody who was writing an award-winning book while she was caring for her dying mother, and how, again, being highly sensitive has impacted that. So each person brings their unique story to the podcast, but through the lens of what it's like to be an empath. And, for the $1 million question, what is an empath? Which right now it's kind of, empath has become quite a buzzword, and different people have different definitions. So I'm going to share mine. To me, an empath is a being, not necessarily just a human, but a being, a living being who picks up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, and the sensations from the world around them. And instead of being like somebody who might have extrasensory perception, intuition, maybe they are psychic or a medium, who have the ability to pick up information, but they know that it is coming from the outside, what makes empaths unique is that empaths process the information as if it is their own. And so, for example, somebody with sensitivity, awareness, like psychic awareness, could walk into a space where a conflict had happened and be like, wow, I can really feel a lot of anger and sadness and fear in this room. The empath is going to walk into the same room, and they are most likely going to feel lousy and then basically say, why am I suddenly feeling so sad, angry, and scared? And then most empaths will then say the next thing, which is, what's wrong with me? Because in my experience, in the hundreds, if not thousands, of empaths that I've spoken to over the last few decades, actually thousands of empaths I've spoken to over the last few decades, what I have found is I've met one who was not told as a child that they were too sensitive, that they were overreacting, that they were taking things too personally, that they were making too big a deal out of it. And also that whatever it was that they were picking up from their parents, especially as children, was not real and not happening. And so as a result, one of the challenges for many empaths is that the information is just validating that the information they're picking up is actually accurate, when maybe there are people who are not necessarily willing to own it.
Well, Jennifer, that was my final question for this interview, so I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast, and you were a fantastic guest.
Oh, Aaron, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to connect with you.
Jennifer was a very insightful guest for this podcast. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination whether you're an empath or not. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.